Hello folks, so if you're watching this, I'm sure that you already know, but NanoV Movies got together a bunch of YouTubers to talk about one excellent scene from X-Men. This can be the movies, the comics, or whatever, okay? This is a video I'm submitting to the playlist after the fact, so be sure to check out all the other better videos that are already out there if you haven't already. But, alright, now that's out of the way, let me just say that I love the X-Men. This is a film series that I could go on and on about all day. But I won't. Today I just want to go on and on about one specific scene. The first scenes that came to my mind for this video were the same ones that came to everyone else's. The obvious picks are from First Class, X2, Logan, and Days of Future Past. Those movies have already been done to death though, so I didn't really want to touch them, which left, well, to be blunt, the bad X-Men movies. I put bad in quotes because I don't think any one of these movies are wholly bad, and I'm being unfair by lumping in X1 and the Wolverine with the bad ones. Those are both good movies. But regardless, even the less good X-Men films have plenty of what I think are excellent scenes. So then I got to thinking, why don't I make a video about a good scene from one of the less well-loved X-Men movies? I thought about it a lot and toyed around with a few. After thinking about it, I had just about settled on the "Why is the moon so lonely" scene from X-Men Origins Wolverine. But then, literally as I was opening up the tab to work on the script, I thought of another scene. And I knew this was the one I had to do because I hadn't seen anyone talk about this, both movie and scene, in the whole playlist. I haven't seen anyone talk about this scene anywhere, actually, and yes, I looked around a bit, both out of curiosity and in trying to do research for this video. So with that said, one excellent scene that I really want to talk about, and actually have for a while, is a deleted scene from the end of X-Men Dark Phoenix. I don't think I have anything to add in terms of reviewing or critiquing the movie itself, so I won't really do that. I'll just say that I think most people are on the same page here. I honestly don't think it's awful, and I think it's unfair that the movie gets lambasted and or just forgotten as much as it does. I actually think that for the most part, everything except for Jessica Chastain's villain is fine and mostly works. Unfortunately, Jessica Chastain's villain is a large part of the movie, so I like the cast and I like a lot of the ideas. I really like the music and some other things. One of those things is this scene, which I just can't fathom as to why it was cut. Okay, so where to start about this scene? I guess originally this was the end of the film. I don't know if it was the end, like final frame end, but it probably was, so we'll just say it was. I love this scene because it feels like a real eulogy, not just for the movie, or for Charles, or for Raven, but for the X-Men series as a whole. I saw a comment once that said Days of Future Past is the perfect end to the X-Men series, and that Logan is the perfect epilogue. And I think that's totally true. With that in mind, this scene is the perfect eulogy.
I'd forgotten who I was. Why I started all this in the first place.
Xavier realizing all of his mistakes and speaking them aloud to an unmarked grave here is beautiful. And look, I know I said none of the X-Men movies are wholly bad, but I really didn't love Apocalypse. I really liked parts of it, mainly the parts involving the school, but in it being sandwiched between Days of Future Past and Logan, while also being made by Bryan Singer, who, despite being a pedophile, made what I think are 2 out of 4 of the best X-Men movies. It's just, well, I don't really know what they were thinking. Apocalypse is as far off base as possible, and everything in Logan really points out the flaws in Apocalypse. Dark Phoenix existing at all, especially in the weird Frankenstein's monster state that it does, is a weird question mark at the end of the X-Men series sentence. Sort of. But for me, this scene makes it almost worthwhile. To me, Charles saying he forgets why he started all this is a remark on the films in general and ties in nicely with Logan. In a meta way, I think it's a good piece of commentary on how these films stumbled and lost their way at times.
We're all at war. In a war with our better and worse selves. And you were right, Raven. I was losing mine.
This line is a beautiful meta-criticism of the films themselves and also their characters. This is a franchise which is constantly in a state of flux and correction from its own mistakes. Again, this film following Logan is a perfect example of that. The confusing and nonsensical timeline and canon is a perfect example of that. And yet, more importantly, I think this scene really perfectly and beautifully sums up a lot of the major themes and struggles the characters of these films go through. It of course applies best to Xavier, both for this film specifically and himself in the other films at large, because ultimately the inner war in oneself between good and evil has always characterized these films, their conflicts, and their characters. To point at the most obvious example is to point at Wolverine. As early on as X1, Logan was at war with himself, and this is a trope that persists all the way to his final appearance in Logan, where it really manifested in the most kind of literal way. This quote applies to Raven and her arc, especially in this film, as she's the one Charles is saying it to.
Just pointing out something that could save your life. You want society to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself.
It applies to Pyro in X2, another scene I thought about doing this video on.
You know all those dangerous mutants you hear about on the news? I'm the worst one.
It applies to Hank in First Class, and it of course applies to Magneto.
You know, I believe that true focus lies somewhere between rage and serenity.
It applies to the mutant conflict presented in X3.
Is it true? They can cure us?
They can't cure us. You want to know why? Because there's nothing to cure. Nothing's wrong with you. Or any of us, for that matter.
And it applies to the way mutants are misunderstood and view themselves as a result.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
It's also beautifully represented in the Bobby and Iceman fight in X3, which another YouTuber in this place already did a video on. That fire and ice balance between X-Men and Brotherhood, mutant and human, good and evil. And furthermore, this scene ties into what Magneto's always saying.
The war is still coming, Charles, and I intend to fight it. By any means necessary.
Well, at this point in the series, Magneto's war has come and gone. It's all over. Both the literal war and the internal war. And Xavier finally points out what the character's war is really with. It was that internal war with themselves. This is also the only point in Dark Phoenix where I feel there's any sort of satisfaction or closure. A lot of the marketing for this movie touted it as the end to the X-Men saga, but nothing in it really feels all that satisfying or conclusive. Of course, there's all the question marks concerning this movie's production, whether or not it's supposed to be 2 parts and all that, but regardless, I think more could have been done, and this scene proves it. And I think this scene adds a lot of closure, and its stripped down sad boy vibes are a lot like those of Logan. In that vein, this scene also thematically ties back to what is honestly one of my favorite lines in all these movies, half in a serious way and half in an ironic way.
You're always sorry, Charles, and there's always a speech.
But nobody cares anymore.
I think there's a degree of meta-ness to this line that can't be missed. Everyone, character and audience alike, is tired of Charles's speeches. And I'll just say, I love the whole Professor X is a dick arc Kinberg took in this flick. But in terms of the meta thing, yeah, straight up when it comes to these movies, and Dark Phoenix especially, for better or worse, no one really cares anymore. And this scene echoes that. This might be Charles's best speech in all the films, and who's around to hear it? No one. He gives it to Raven, who's gone. And that's okay, because who needs to hear it the most? Charles himself. He spent so long preaching to others that he never paused to preach to himself. He's finally realized his own flaws, which he'd never really done in any of these other films before. Yeah, obviously he needed a bit of bullying to whoop him back into shape into his future past, and it was awesome. But he was at a personal low point due to a lack of hope and faith in himself. In this film, he was too full of himself, and in this scene, he's finally really humbled. It's also as far away from the funeral and the last stand as possible, and given these two movies' many connections, I think that's really interesting. None of this is even to mention James McAvoy's performance, which is always great, but here is just...
Lost so much. I'm sorry that I didn't see it sooner, and I'm not as evolved as I thought I was.
Wow. And the score by Hans Zimmer here. Woo! The piece is called Coda, for anyone who's interested, and it's amazing. Definitely one of my favorite pieces to ever come out of these movies, and let me just say, these movies have great music. But let's talk about that a little. Coda. In music, a coda is, well, here's the Google Dictionary definition. The concluding passage of a piece or movement, typically forming an addition to the basic structure. The concluding section of a dance, especially of a pas de deux, I don't know if I said that right, or the finale of a ballet in which the dancers parade themselves before the audience. A concluding event, remark, or section. A more or less independent passage at the end of a composition introduced to bring it to a satisfactory close. See more. You might not know this, but I am, quite possibly, and this is recognized by the musical community at large, one of the worst trumpet players of all time. But despite that, I still know literally everything that there is to know about music ever. So this interests me a lot. Earlier I called this scene, and Dark Phoenix in general, a eulogy. And it is, but I think Coda is also a perfect description. And whether or not you can make the case that this movie is an objectively good coda or good eulogy is irrelevant in claiming that it nonetheless is one. As I said before, this is the only scene in the movie that feels like it's really trying to put an end point on things for the X-Men at all. I think it's fair to say that I'd already gotten their end point before, but if this is what the real end point is, then I think this scene serves as a fine coda. Hans Zimmer, as always, was thinking big brain. So after Charles's heartbreaking speech, he returns to the school, which in this version is maybe closed or something. I don't know, it's hard to say. It's a big mess and the bad guys get locked up in the mansion or taken away or something in the start of the scene. But in the actual version of the film, these two characters are dead, so I don't really know what's happening. Anyways, Charles wheels through the mess of the school, he's wheeling through the mess of his past. And of course, the mess of his future. This is a far cry from the ending we thought we had and expected, namely the happy, busy halls from Days of Future Past. This lingering shot in particular of the iconic staircase where Beast and Logan fought is especially moving because it really reminds us of the journey these characters, these films, and ourselves have been on. In Days of Future Past, Hank says to Charles,
"What if the war is inevitable? What if she's meant to kill Trask? What if this is just simply who she is?"
The end of Days of Future Past says otherwise, but Logan doesn't, and neither does this. Things aren't looking great for the X-Men in this scene, and little shots like this one of the staircase are, I think, so good. This whole scene is shot beautifully, and is the only time Kinberg really flexes any directorial style in this movie. Everything about this scene is so dynamic and layered compared to the rest of the film that I don't even understand how it can be part of the same movie. It's even structured like its own short film, with a beginning, a middle, and end. Basically, Charles is punished in 3 stages. First, he's forced to apologize. Then second, he's forced to see his efforts come to nothing. And third, he's left alone, in what might be the best part of the scene and film. The scene ends with a lonely struggle for Charles to pull his wheelchair into his car. I just love this moment, honestly. I think it's some of the most human we ever see Charles. There's no Nightcrawler to teleport him into the car and no special X-Cellent ramp to lower and let him in. His powers can't help him here and neither can anyone else's. All he has is what any human would have. And since Charles always strived for equality but still let his ego get so big, this is a beautiful, smart, humble, and thematic scene and ending for such an iconic character. To me, the X-Men, both in the films and in the comics, are the most interesting when they're just being human. The small moments in these movies, like Bobby with his parents, Logan with Kayla, things like that, are always the best parts. The parts about hope, the parts about family, about sacrifice and loss, these real-world emotions and problems are what make the film so good and so real. This doesn't just go for the X-Men either. These are things which make any superhero interesting, or really, any character interesting. And this moment, this last, bitter, lonely struggle for Charles, has all of that. And that is why I consider it one excellent